Good
Chris,
afternoon. Great to meet you. 31 years on from the original release of Fish Out of Water, we're looking at a sort of revamped version of it.
Yeah.
In fact, 31 years this month as we're talking, November 2006.
Yeah, that's 31 years. Yeah, it's strangely enough, it's the only solo album I've ever made. Although, as you mentioned earlier at the end of the conversation, I have started work on another one. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, and it's been out there for 31 years, and it came out in '75, as you say. When it did, I think it did extremely well for the time. It did about 500,000 albums worldwide.
Yeah, it went into the charts in America and in the UK. Yeah, which was pretty good.
Yeah, it was, and you know, those were very pioneering sort of days, because none of us really knew what, you know, exactly what we were doing, and it hadn't been long since 24-track recording had been available. So, and I remember I just moved into my house in Surrey, and I put together, you know, a studio in the basement, and it was all part of the same project, really. I bought some equipment from the MCI company in Florida, and you know, like a mixing desk and tape recording machines, and then I bought some other Studer half-inch and quarter-inch machines as well. Mm-hmm. And you know, put together my own studio, and at the point of it, you know, I did a lot of the wiring and stuff myself, along and together with the, you know, obviously the people who knew how it should be wired. But so the whole project became a part of finishing the studio in the house, and then making this album.
If we sort of backtrack a little bit before then, the initial idea to do the albums for me was quite interesting, because no major band, and let's face it, at that time, Yes were one of the biggest rock bands in the world.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're going to take 9 months out or so, we're going to all make solo albums. And I thought, oh. Then everyone said, well, the band aren't going to split, this is going to be an addition, we'll do these, and then we'll come back as Yes.
Yeah.
And that was quite pioneering, really, because not many bands had done that, really.
No, not really.
Where did the idea come from to do that?
Well, I can say it wasn't the most popular idea in the world up at Atlantic Records, that's for sure. Yeah. Because I guess they smelt the idea of disintegration. And I think it reflected a little bit in their promotional effort too. They didn't go extremely. We didn't go to great lengths to promote the albums that they had on Atlantic. Of course, Rick Wakeman was on A&M.
Yeah.
And you know, and they did go to lengths of a lot of promotion for him. And I don't know if many people know this, but I think Rick sold about 30 million albums between King Miser Henry VIII and Journey to the Centre of the Earth.
Yeah.
So he was well ahead in the lead on those stakes in terms of sales. But the rest of us were all on Atlantic, and I guess they probably didn't want to you know, have too much solo success going, because I think they'd already had experience with Crosby, Stills and Nash and that, and they could smell when people were getting itchy and wanted to break up the corporate, you know.
I guess what record companies see is 5 times more product for 5 times less the money coming in. So probably. In some ways that's understandable, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the same time, artistically, for the artist, it's great, because you've still got Yes to come back to, but you've got your own thing, which obviously sees a release for your own artistic
well,
endeavors.
For us, it was a safety valve, I think, and that's why we did it. And we were just all very interested in recording, which was the. I know John had you know, recording facilities in his garage, I think, in his house, and to a lesser extent Steve Howe. I think he used more the commercial studios more, but everyone, it was that era when everyone was getting into wanting their own recording facility at home.
I can remember reading some of the reviews. It's actually probably the Melody Maker, which was, if you like, the music paper to read if you want to take serious music into account. And I can remember saying, this is the most Yes-like album. I'm thinking, well, he is actually in Yes, so it's bound to sound like a little bit like Yes. But to be fair, Your bass sound is very, very distinctive. If we can talk a little bit about your style and how you came to, if you like, develop that style.
Yeah, well, the strange thing is that the style that I suppose I became best known for because it was on our most successful single at that time was Roundabout, with the bass riff on that was actually very mixed, real loud in the mix by Eddie Offord, and also what a lot of people didn't realise at the time is that I also played the bass part on a guitar an octave higher, mixed that in with it as well.
Right.
So people thought that was my Rickenbacker bass sound. It wasn't exactly just my Rickenbacker bass sound. It was two guitars.
To be fair though, the Rickenbacker sound is very distinctive as well, and there's not many people. I mean, I know John Entwistle, for an example, played a Rickenbacker.
He did in the early days.
In the early days, as did Pete Quaife. What Paul McCartney did, and we were talking about this a little earlier, except he just sounds like Paul McCartney, whatever he plays. Yeah,
well, I think that's to an extent it applies to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have over the years had quite a collection of guitars. And people have always said to me whether I'm playing a Fender Jazz or a Gibson, it always sounds like me anyway. You know, I just that's the way.
But that's good for you.
Yeah. But interesting enough, on the Fish Out of Water album, I was actually experimenting with different sounds from the ones that I'd become known for, which I said was the twangy, trebly roundabout sound, and. On Hold Out Your Hand and You By My Side, the first two tracks, I actually went for more of a Jack Bruce kind of sound.
Like a lead instrument,
yeah. But not so much high treble, but more a MIDI kind of distorted sound that Jack Bruce was well known for. Because, of course, he was one of my great influences, as was McCartney, who you mentioned, as was Entwistle, probably the most influential. And to an extent Bill Wyman too was an influence. So it was a great time to be a young bass player because of all these different people who had great schemes of their own that you could borrow from, you know.
There's a lot of books on the market about Yes, and some are very scholarly, shall we say. It's like reading a textbook manual on something.
Yeah.
But I remember reading one who compared your bass playing rather favourably to John Coltrane and Jimi Hendrix, and I thought, God, he's got to be pleased with that.
Actually, I know the guy you're talking about. When I read that, I was like, oh, wow, okay. Good, I'll go and have a drink.
Having got that accolade under your belt, I suppose the sky's the limit, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that comment wasn't made about me until that was in the 80s, I think, that book came out, or maybe even the 90s. But... the 70s was just a very exciting time. I mean, I was in my 20s and just, everything was very sky's the limit, and let's try and do what we can. And of course, we're getting great critical acclaim, as you mentioned, from papers like The Melody Maker and the New Musical Express, and it became a bit of a joke after a while, the poll winning.
You wouldn't put bets on it because you probably wouldn't take bets on who was going to win, would
No. I mean, there was one. I think it was a Melody Maker Awards that have been given out by Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, and it was the year that they decided to have these kind of ceramic. Balls that have Melody Maker inside them that were on a little pole that was on a little stand.
Right.
And so, of course, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, when they realised that between the two of us, Steve Howe and myself, Yes arrangers and bass player and guitar player and all kinds of... We had about 9 of these. Yeah. So, of course, they said, well, we'll just get this out of the way all at once. So, of course, these balls weren't attached to the cylinder. So
an armful of awards.
Yeah, an armful of awards, which of course we both dropped them all on the floor. It was, But I remember meeting, spending the rest of that day with Peter Cook was quite one of those days.
Entertaining,
it was very entertaining. He was one of my favourite comedians of all time, and so to actually be in the back of a Daimler limo with him was quite a thrill for me.
If we look at the album then, Fish Out of Water, once the decision had been made to record the album, how quickly did the songwriting come together? I've always wondered if there were any tracks on that album that might have been considered for a Yes album had Yes made an album at that point.
Well, in actual fact, one of the tracks did show up on Going for the One. One of the contenders for Fish Out of Water was Parallels,
right?
Which and Going for the One we recorded in 76, 77 over the winter.
Yeah,
which was only like a year afterwards. So that track had also been a contender, but it didn't fit in. Well, there wasn't enough time. The album was pretty full. It was about 20 minutes aside, I think.
Yeah, it's about 42 minutes.
Yeah,
which is at the time for vinyl was probably pushing the limit.
That was pushing the limit a bit. Yeah. But of course, I had a great engineer. Greg Jackman, who was the brother of Andrew Jackman, who did the orchestral arrangements.
He'd been
on
in the
album.
Sin with you as well.
And he'd been I'd known Andrew since I was 5 years old. We were born on the same block in Kingsbury, which is next to Wembley, and so I'd known him, and we spent all our young days together in the local church choir, and I knew all the brothers, so it was kind of interesting because Andrew, as I said, was a bit older than me, but he was in the Sin, and Greg became the engineer, and Jeremy, the middle brother, became the guy who founded the King Singers. So they were a very musical family, and their dad, Bill Jackman, was in the LSO as a clarinet player.
One of the things that I noticed about Fish Out of Water was the incredible orchestrations on there. They really, God bless him, he's dead now, Andrew, but his arrangements on that album are absolutely stunning.
Are stunning, and I'm just so lucky that we were caught at that moment in time, at a time when my composing was developing, and of course Andrew was an incredible character because he basically strove to carve a name for himself as a modern day classical composer, but he didn't mind going and do sessions for the Sex Pistols as well, and which he did. He actually did arrangements on Who Killed Bambi. I think that was what it was called.
From the film, the Rock and Roll Swindle,
So, so Andrew was an incredible person to work with, and in reality, looking back, a lot of the compositional elements on Fish Out of Water came from his head as well. And I used to say to him, Andrew, you should get a bit of a co-write credit on this. And he'd go, no, it's fine. I'll just take the arrangements credit. And
because possibly because he was a friend of yours as well, he didn't take advantage. So there are people who possibly would have taken advantage of a situation like that. Yeah,
well, Andrew and I'd known each other since we were 5, so it was like it was natural for us to sit around, him play the piano and me play bass and work things out. And I used to do sessions for him because he used to do like those 6 songs in 3 hours for Woolworths, and he'd do the arrangements on those, and then he'd pull me in for 50 quid or something, whichever it was in the 70s or 60s.
I'm sure that'd be an interesting thing for the Yes collectors to try and track down, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Do
you remember any of the songs
well,
that
of
you
course,
did?
there wouldn't be any credit. Oh, yeah, I do remember. There were things like just cover versions of Amen Corner and stuff like that,
So you heard it here then. Chris Squire is on Top of the Pops album.
Oh, yeah. Well, Walrus, I think it was Walrus for sure.
Yeah.
And and Andrew used to say why he'd do that, because I was playing a bass already. Well, we were in the Sin, I suppose, at that time is when that was going on, and he liked to write the more complicated bass part because that was getting him recognised as a good pop arranger. But there was never the time for anyone to learn it properly. so I used to go around his house like the day before and learn the bass part, and then of course that would make me look more competent when all these other guys were just like reading, at their sessions.
You've also got a couple of the guys here. Well, one previous member of Yes with Bill Bruford on the album, and a then current member of Yes with Patrick Moraz.
Yes.
I mean, was that deliberate?
Well, it's always been. It was always weird to me that, and I did not for me wanting to trying to keep Bill. It was always weird when he left at the end of recording Close to the Edge, because I kept looking at him like, you know, the way Larry David, because I look at people on his show, you know, like, Bill, let me go through this. You're an economics major, but you don't quite understand. You're making more money now you ever have, and you want to leave. Yeah. And he was just bitten by this jazz bug, and he just wanted to go and play more jazzy electric stuff with Bob Fripp, and that's what he wanted to do, because, you know, Bill was a dyed-in-the-wall jazz guy. So anyway, he left Yes, and Alan White came in, and that all worked out. And you know, but then when I came to do Fish Out of Water, I thought, well, you know, I've had all these years playing with Bill. It makes sense. So I asked him if he'd want to come and play on it, and he was happy to. Do
you think that's possibly why many of the critics and people reviewing albums said this is the most Yes-like album of the solo album?
Probably, because it was the Yes rhythm section up until, you know, as I said, close to the edge.
Yeah. And
you know, Bill and I did have. He was a very unique drummer, which made it possible for me to be more of a unique bass player, I suppose, in the way that our styles developed. He didn't play like other drummers a lot of the time. He played in a jazz way, and he used his bass drum to play accents and his snare drum as the bass drum.
Yeah.
So therefore, that made or gave opportunity to various early Yes producers, and Eddie Offord when he came in as an engineer, to make the bass more like the drums.
Yeah.
And he was decorating what I was doing more. So, you know, it was a match that you know, probably happened by accident, but resulted in a lot of the way I played and a lot of the way I was mixed too.
You play guitar on the album, and I've noticed that a lot of bass players are sometimes frustrated guitarists. Is that the case for you?
Well, no, not really. I never had any illusions about myself as a guitar player, but I did know I could play as well as Neil Young.
Okay. With respect to Neil Young, of course.
Well, yeah. No, although I'm sure at the time, though, I was kind of just fascinated by his style and everything he was doing, and that funky way of playing electric guitar he had, and I thought I can do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so there is a bit of that on the end of Silently Falling, and there's just a bit of picking, scale picking or chordal picking on the Safe song, but what stands out about that album in a way is that's the only guitar on it.
Yeah.
And it was just a 12-string Rickenbacker on those two tracks.
Okay.
And there's no guitar anywhere else on the album, which of course is unusual for a rock and roll album.
It is. It's very unusual. Yeah. Let's look at some of the tracks. The opening two tracks run into each other. Hold Out Your Hand and You By My Side, right?
Yeah.
Was that the way you wanted to do them, or the way you wrote them, or did that just come when you were scheduling the album, maybe putting the tracks down or making see what sort of goes where, and was that a later decision of the mix maybe, or was it definitely decided that those two songs went together?
I'm pretty sure that at a certain point that when we've been working on those two songs, that we agreed to link them. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was working with Andrew, because in an odd way we had to have a lot of stuff pretty much organised, because he then went and orchestrated it for the orchestra, and and we pretty much had the whole of the LSO on those sessions, thanks to Andrew's dad, who fixed the sessions and got them at a very reasonable rate, even for those days, which when things were much cheaper than obviously they are now, but he got an even better deal than that. So,
mm-hmm.
But we had to have all of that work, and Andrew had worked in sessions with large groups like that, and he knew how much time we had. So a lot of the way, the amount we budgeted the amount of orchestra for the amount of time it would take to what he wrote, and I know he pushed it a lot, but he'd worked with all those guys before, and they knew that they were giving extra effort because he was Bill's son, so there was a good feeling around those whole sessions. And I must admit, when I was at it was just a session, 3-hour session, and they did all the major pieces in that, And I was amazed when I was actually there and hearing it all happen in 3 hours like that, and it being transformed from bass drums and a guide vocal, you know, to that, you know.
It is, but the arrangements, again, we've said this, they are incredibly impressive by any standard.
Yeah.
And I suppose when you were listening to that must have thought, hey, I've got something here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it was the first time. Yeah, but up until then, Andrew just showed me dots on you know, what's it called? Music paper.
Manuscript
paper, exactly. And although I could read a bit as a chorister, you know, I've never got together. You go, you see what's happening here? The flutes are doing this. I go, oh, yeah, it looks good. So it wasn't until I actually heard them play it, that I thought, fucking hell, that's amazing.
You're able to bluff it, but when it comes, you think, yeah, okay. It takes a certain, I think, talent to be able to just look at something and then play it straight off, I think, anyway.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it's a different discipline, isn't it?
Yeah, but that whole thing of going at one stage further, being able to just write it down on manuscript and just know what it's sounding like by looking at that. I mean, you know, I mean, obviously I've met other people since then who can do that, and Trevor Rabin being one of them. But Andrew was always the guy that I grew up thinking, God, he, you know, it's amazing that he can actually do this, you know.
Let's look at one of the other tracks, the final track on the album, Safe, which is the extended track.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
I mean, just when you think it's coming to an end, something else comes in, and it's almost like a piece of modern classical music. There's movements in there.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I really like that track. I know that's a favourite track of a lot of the fans as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically the premise of that is that it was a song, and we knew the song only had that much of a length to go, and then you know, it wasn't. We were thinking about, well, should we write another verse, or should I write more words, and should there be another chorus, and then once again with Andrew, we both agreed that oh no, let's just finish the song there and just make it a big instrumental outro. And then I said, well, let's try and do it, you know, like a fugue, because I always like fugues.
Yeah.
And that's the premise of how most of that end is based, in the fugue form.
There's a piece at the very end, and I was listening to it today actually, that you think, gosh, it reminded me a little bit of the end of A Day in the Life, that chord. And then there's the coda where the bass comes in again, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I know.
Because just when you think it's finished, there's just that little bit more to surprise you.
Yeah, well, that was just something that was an afterthought, and I think it was because, you know, I almost felt guilty about ending it on the dun dun dun, you know.
The big finish.
Yeah, it's like. And then I remember it was interesting how that came about, because I was just fiddling around in the studio with a Gibson double neck that I had, well, I still have, which was a bass, you know, like an EB, a brown wood one, and a 6-string guitar. And I was just messing around, you know, with having the guitar pickups on, but playing the bass. And that's how that came about. That's actually what that is.
But as I say, it was a nice surprise at the very end of that, because you think that big sort of chord then that's just fading away, and then this sort of picking comes in. I thought, oh, that's actually really nice.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, yeah. A lot of happy accidents happened on that album. You know,
of course, sometimes the best moments are purely accidents, aren't they? They happen, and you think, we'll leave that.
Yeah. Because
if you tried to do that and maybe contrived to do that, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, no, exactly. No. I mean, I've had a lot of those, especially during all the Yes recordings. You know, wow, did we mean to do that? No, let's keep it though. You know, so
a couple of things here. We've got the album here, which you signed many years ago for me on CD.
Right.
There we go, Fish Out of Water, and the cover, the photograph, was taken by Brian Lane, who was obviously the Yes manager. How did he manage to work his way into that as photographer?
Believe it or not, it's been pulled down now, but that was the Detroit Hilton.
The Detroit Hilton?
Yeah, in Detroit, in the States. And the elevators were in the middle, and either side was like this metal latticework thing either side of these two elevator doors, and Brian Lane had just got one of those click Polaroid things. That morning he'd gone and bought one. When they very first came out. And he thought for a laugh that he'd stand at the elevator and take a picture of everyone as they got up in the morning. Fortunately, I don't look like I've just got up.
It's a very unusual photograph, though.
Yeah.
And of course, on an album, which is 12-inch, it's very impressive. It looks really good.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's just one of those lucky things. And the fact that even the symmetry of the way my face is lined up with the metalwork is purely luck. I mean, I just got out of the elevator, stood behind this thing, and he went like that one shot.
Another one-shot deal.
Yeah.
Where's that from? It's like sort of stained glass. Is that?
That was a piece of stained glass that I bought from Lillian Nassau, which was a well-known antique glass dealer in New York, and it was made by Tiffany himself, and it was actually a 3D Tiffany glass thing, because he was famous for making lamps mainly, but he made a few windows like that, and the actual depth of field of the stained glass, where these fish are hanging in the middle on this thing, this actually is thicker here, the glass, than it is around here. And I just bought it really, and it was in my shower at my house. And
didn't that come as the poster with the album originally?
Yeah, it did.
As well? Yeah. Now we have another surprise here for you: a promotional single taken from the album in America, "Lucky 7."
Yeah.
Now, first of all, the track stands out on the album to me as completely different from the rest of the album. It sounds very American.
Yeah.
And this particular version that we have here is an edit, and it's been edited by no less a person than Tom Dowd, who was, of course, a very famous, again, God bless him, he's dead now, but a very famous producer.
And which I've never heard.
Well, look at that, it's amazing. There you go. You see one side mono and one side stereo.
So
there you go.
Stereo or mono?
The mono's in red and stereo's in green.
Oh, wow.
So that's, I presume, mono for the AM stations and stereo for the FM stations.
Yeah, this was obviously a promotional tool that Atlantic Records put out there, and I guess it was to promote the album on the radio. I didn't know it existed, actually. Well,
what I find is quite strange is that they've picked the track that is so unlike the rest of the album to promote the album, which, can you imagine people buying that and then listening to the rest of the album? When it's not that it's a bad album, they just think, well, this is completely different from everything else on the album. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was really. I don't know why it was. It just went in that direction because it was kind of simple, and once again, Bill Bruford's jazz influence came into it, and then I think because I felt it was heading in a slightly jazzy direction, plus the fact it is in 7/4, that's why it's called Lucky 7. I then had the idea of having Mel Collins come and play sax on it, and
some great sax on
sax
there.
is brilliant on it. I know it's. I listened to it the other day. It still stands up. It was amazing sax solo. I don't know if Mel is he still with us or not?
He's in the he was last time I spoke. It was in the 21st Century Schizoid band, which is all the ex-members of Crimson.
Oh, really?
In the band. So yeah, he's with them, or he was up until recently.
Yeah.
So he's still with us, thankfully.
Yeah. I know.
But the sax playing on that particular track, I had to say, is absolutely wonderful.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I remember it was pretty much a take one or take two or something. You know, it definitely he just had a run through and then did it. You know,
it's from what we've been discussing. It seems the album came together very, very quickly. Then
it did. Well, I think once again why it did is because Andrew was very organised. And he made sure that we dotted the I's and crossed the T's before we started getting people in. So it was arranged, Mel Collins is coming in to do this, that's Wednesday, 3 hours. And we got it done in a very business-like kind of way, and which kept the enthusiasm bubbling pretty high because of the fact that it was moving along quickly and everyone who was involved in it wasn't hanging around, so it was kind of good. And Mel also plays baritone sax on the Silently Falling, the middle, once again, jazzy keyboard solo, and we've just gotten back to Patrick Moraz. That was your original question, I think, that Patrick was on the album. And Patrick made two very important contributions to the album. One is a fantastic Hammond organ solo that he plays in that, which that probably was a few takes, and we probably did a bit of mixing number 1 and number 5 and 3. But it ended up sounding very cohesive and really, really good. And once again, Bill's driving it in a very jazz-like way. And then the very other extremely interesting thing that Patrick brought to this album was, as far as I know, it's the first time anyone played a synth bass on something.
Really?
Yeah. As we're back in the days now, when just prior to when the Bee Gees were doing their disco thing and that, and I don't know whether Patrick had heard it somewhere, maybe on a dance record or something, but when we were doing the end of Silently Falling, you know, I said, oh, it'd be nice if I just did some noodling, twiddling around on the bass. Yeah. And he goes, oh, well, I'll just play this bass line, like the simple bass line, on my synthesizer. Oh, well, you can do that. Yeah. It was like one of those. And
another happy accident.
And so that's like one of the very early original, I don't know, maybe you can find something earlier, but examples of a mini Moog playing a bass line before all the dance records came along.
When the album came out, it went into the American, I think the Billboard Top 100. I think it went in the top 30 in the UK album chart.
Yeah.
So that must have been very pleasing for you. But shortly after that, I think in early '76, I mean, the band got back together and you were going to do a tour. I think it was like spring '76.
Yeah.
It was called the Solos Tour, which I presume was to help promote the solo album.
Yeah. And
throw in some Yes stuff as well.
Yeah.
Problem being, the solo stuff kind of disappeared after about a week.
Yeah. Well, it should have been called the Good Intentions Tour because we, you know, rehearsals are always slightly chaotic, and because they were always associated with some new bit of Roger Dean fiberglass thing with lights and you know, it was all pioneering stuff in those days, production and everything. So all our pre-tour rehearsals were just made up with people wearing masks and soaring like fiberglass and as well as trying to play music. I don't know why we didn't do them in different buildings. But,
yes, it would have been a better idea.
But it was part of the whole camaraderie thing, I think, between the crew and us and how things were in those days. But it would result in the fact that we draw up a set and probably never actually played it until the first show in its entirety. And we all learned a bit from each other's solo albums to play, and we got round to doing the first show, and I think it ended up just about 5 hours long.
Well, we're getting into Grateful Dead territory there, aren't we?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure the Yes fans would have loved, but as an artist, you kind of flag somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, well, I'd seen the Grateful Dead around that period, actually at the Rainbow, up there in, what was it, Kensington Town? Where is it at?
Finsbury Park.
Finsbury Park, that's right, yeah. And because our lighting guy, Michael Tate, was on loan to them, it was between touring for us, so he went and did a stint with the Grateful Dead, and I remember I went and stood beside him on the side of the stage while they were playing. Because Michael was very responsible for a lot of the Heart the Sunrise flashing lights and the Yes dynamic thing and that. And he was standing there for 20 minutes and he said, yeah, it's blue now. I said, yeah, it's a bit different for it. Yeah, he said, 20 minutes will be green for the 20 minutes. He said, and then I'll probably go red after that.
So they weren't big on
the hour.
They weren't big on production.
No,
Dead.
No, they weren't big on production. But you see, getting back to the Yes Show, you see, the Yes Show was generally a much more high energy thing, and so although you could do that with the Dead in that kind of a laid back Quaaludes world, you know, you couldn't really do that with Yes because it was a lot more like an active show, and I think that would then have gotten boring for people after Well, a lot of our shows were 3.5 hours, but that was about the maximum we wanted to do.
2 of the songs from the album, though, you did manage to do on a couple of the dates. Obviously, the first 2 in the album, which were "Hold Out Your Hand" and "You by My Side."
Yeah.
And you said earlier we were talking that John Anderson was playing along on the bass on some of those gigs. Well, he's a big joiner inner, John, isn't he? To be fair.
Yeah.
But that must have been an interesting thing for you.
Well, it was. Yeah. I mean, I seem to remember him saying, "Well, what key is it in?" And I said, "Well, it's in A flat." And I remember lending him my Paul McCartney Hofner bass.
Right.
Because I said, "Well, yeah, we could try it. You know, you could just play plonk along on some low notes while I'm playing the higher stuff." I said, "It might sound good." I never really know whether it did or not, because it was fairly shambolic. You know, just all of us trying to do that. Of course, Patrick Moraz had played on. No, he hadn't played on those on the record. He'd mimed
in the video.
on the video, yeah.
Right.
So he knew a little bit more about it. And I remember learning something from Eliza Sunhill of John's, playing bass pedals and, I don't know, triggering vocals.
Yeah.
It was quite involved, you know, trying to do these tracks. And I think after a while we just realised, well, we couldn't sustain a show that was going that long.
I can literally tell you it's about 10 days into the tour, and there's a definite cut that was like, no more solo stuff. I mean, it was very, it's not like it kind of petered out, it was just right there.
That's right.
If you look at the bootlegs, it's quite interesting.
I'd like to hear one day, see what John's bass playing was like.
I mean, that tour was very special for a number of reasons, because you played at the JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. Was it 120, 130,000 people? I mean,
yeah, that was the 76
absolutely
tour, yeah.
a huge audience.
Yeah.
I mean, how difficult is it to relate to an audience like that? I mean, it's one thing playing at the Rainbow, but then when you're playing in a stadium where they're right in the bleachers at the back. I mean, that was a big show. You had Peter Frampton and Gary Wright on there as well.
That's right. Well, luckily Peter Frampton had been booked to do this stadium tour with us, and prior to his album being so big, so that obviously helped swell the amount of people, because by the time we actually did the shows, he had that huge album with Frampton Comes Alive. But I sort of remember working it out. God, I'm making $5,000 a minute on this show.
It's not bad.
No, it wasn't bad. But I don't think it ever happened again.
What would that work out per hour, hourly rate? Yeah, it's great when you can work it down to the minute. But that tour was very good. And yet after that, again, there was another change in the ranks of Yes. I mean, it seemed to be a real peak, and then off in another direction. And obviously with going for the one, there was the track Parallels, which you said, which had previously been earmarked for Fish Out of Water,
Parallels, had been a contender for Fish Out of Water, but in the scheme of things, it didn't really fit. And it showed up on Going for the One, which we recorded in Montreux, and another exciting round of recording events.
Actually, if I think about that now, that song, it makes perfect sense that comes from the Fish Out of Water scene, because I can imagine that actually on the album. Now, I know you've said it. Yeah, it's strange that.
Yeah, it could have been, and it would have been nice to have heard it orchestrated as well. But there was never any orchestration done for it. But I don't know, maybe one day, maybe I'll do something like that.
Well, you've got the album is coming out. It's going to be a nice all singing, all dancing. This interview is going to be one side. We've got a bonus track on there, I think, and you're currently putting together ideas for another album. I mean, this is going to be your second solo album in 25 years.
Yeah, I know.
To be fair, you have been distracted by your full-time job, yes, but...
Yeah, I know. I know, whereas some of my partners have put out 130 solo albums. I won't mention exactly who that is, but a little bit of overkill, maybe.
I can remember you saying at one point that... I discussed this with you a few years ago, and you said, well, it's difficult because Andrew Jackman's not around now, and he played a big part in this album we discussed. So you're never going to make another album that sounds like this album.
Not exactly like it, but I can tell you that I've the guy that I was working with in this recent Sin revival on keyboards, Gerard Johnson, is very much from the same school as Andrew. And strangely enough, he is also... he's also a Catholic choir master as well. He does that as well as and he was also in the band Saint Etienne. So he's
There's a kind of thread there, then, isn't there?
Yeah, he's a kind of a well-rounded kind of guy, and he loves, as we do, Andrew's work. And so I've been working with him, and strangely enough, although we haven't pushed the orchestral direction or anything, the things that have come to light are leaning in that direction.
Okay.
But they're different. And of course, it's 35 years later, so with the technology we have now to do so much more, and of course, to be able to, hear it even before it puts real strings on it,
Of course, I mean, what sort of time scale are we looking at? I mean, I know currently, Yes, are on what they call a sabbatical, as they call it. I mean, we don't know how long that's going to last.
Well, I do know that we are talking now about rejoining with each other to do some work. I hopefully would like it to be next year. I've got a suspicion it may not happen until 2008 because of other people's plans.
Which might fit in nicely for the 40th anniversary of Yes, though.
Yeah, well, exactly. Which, so I would be remiss not to use this time prior to that to get the second one underway. And believe it or not, actually I've already got about 29 minutes worth of ideas, not finished ideas, but ideas.
Something to build on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll watch this space. In the meantime, Fish Out of Water is about to be reissued into the world again.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to that. And we're also obviously looking forward to more work from you with Yes and this second solo album 35 years on. Chris, great pleasure to talk to you.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Right. Bye-bye.